Mr. Buster Flips!
Mr. Buster Flips! Mr. Buster Flips! Mr. Buster Flips!
Hi, and welcome to today's video on CER paragraphs. This obviously is a key skill for us when we're doing expository writing, and so therefore I just wanted to do kind of a refresher. Many of you probably know how to write these paragraphs, but I just want to make sure that we remember the pieces of our CER paragraphs and how to put them together. So CER obviously stands for claim, evidence, and reasoning, right? And that's how we are going to structure our paragraphs as well, with those three components as we go through. So I'm going to briefly talk about claims and then briefly talk about the other two components as we go through this video. So if we start looking at claim, a claim needs to have four characteristics, okay? Obviously it needs to be a complete and grammatically correct sentence, right? So the reader can understand you fully and so that you sound scholarly and academic. It needs to be responding to the question, right? Whatever the question is asking you in the essay prompt, you need to make sure that you use the key words from that question. So first thing, highlight the key words in the question, make sure you capture them, and that you reinsert those into your claim statement so that you're making sure that your claim is relevant to whatever the question is asking, right? It needs to be assertive. So you want to use strong language that's confident, that's showing that you are trying to persuade your reader, right? That's the whole point of exposition, that you're trying to make your reader agree with you by the end of the essay. You don't need to insert little low modal verbs to kind of drop that level of certainty. So you don't need words like in my humble opinion, or I think, maybe, or perhaps. Skip all that, right? Go for an assertive, this is the case kind of voice, right? So be assertive in your writing. And lastly, a claim needs to be arguable. That means you need to have an extension phrase on it. So it's not just a simple claim, but you need some kind of something that makes it interesting, that makes it yours, that makes it something that you can build your argument around. So let's think a bit more about what the distinction is between a claim and summary, because that's kind of where how we make our ideas arguable. If you're writing summary, oops, there we go, sorry, go up one step, there we go. You're often just repeating what the text is saying. You're not really adding any new thinking of yourself. Whereas a claim, as we previously said, is going to be answering the question, is going to be assertive, and it's going to be arguable, having some kind of extension phrase to make it interesting and arguable, okay? So if you think of an example like this one, Rubiger asserts that juveniles are too immature to make decisions. That's purely, it's just a restatement of what is already in the text, right? You're not adding any of your own thinking. That's more of an example of a bit of evidence, really, in terms of, or paraphrase of what Ger is saying. Another example, juveniles suffer more in prison than adult offenders, is more towards a claim, but it's still not adding any individual take, any personal take, right? It's just stating what we already see in this case, Melanie Robbins' text, right? It's not adding any deeper thinking. So we want to try to avoid those kind of summary type statements. Instead, you want to deepen the thinking and make your claims arguable. So in order to do that, if we take that last example we had there, juveniles suffer more in prison than adult offenders, if you add an extension phrase on that, that is coming out of your own thinking, and therefore they must never be treated the same in the justice system, that then adds your personal take on it, right? And it gives your paragraph some direction, right? You're going to bring up examples of why juveniles suffer in prison, and it gives you a kind of an angle to argue, right? So it makes your claim arguable. So that's where you want to head in your claim writing. If we move on then to the E part of our CER, the evidence. So the evidence obviously is going to come out of the text that you are studying, whether it's articles or a novel or whatever it is, in the form of a quotation. And that quotation needs to be introduced through a lead-in, or a context statement, if that's what your teachers called it in the past, and it must be followed by a citation to show where the text is coming from. So in most of our cases, when we're writing expository writing about non-fiction texts, you want to also add in that lead-in some element of ethos. Why should we trust this particular writer? So It can be like this, for instance, right? We have the author's name, and then something that gives them ethos, something that gives them credibility and establishes why we should trust this particular person. And then you say writes in his, her article, and then you have the title of the article, and then the actual quotation itself, right? Followed then by parentheses and the author's name and the page number, right? So an example of this could be something like this. Melanie Robbins, that's the person. Legal analyst at CNN, that's the ethos, that's why we should trust her because she's an expert at this. In her article, and here comes the title, When the Bogeyman is a Little Girl, writes that juveniles don't have the capacity to make sound decisions. That's the quote that we're looking at, right? And then we're ending with a citation here with the surname and the page number. Okay, that's the shape of your evidence. So you have your claim, you've got your evidence. We're now going to move on to the reasoning. So in your reasoning, you have essentially 3 steps to go through. And this is going to be different if you're writing a literary essay. We'll take that in a different video because that's going to look slightly, your CTA analysis is going to look slightly different. But if you're doing expository reasoning, it should have essentially 3 steps. The first step is the paraphrasing of the quote. This is when you simply show that you've understood what the quote is actually saying. You're restating the meaning of the quote in your own words. So this is what the author means in their quote. That's to show that you've understood it and to kind of summarize the quote and the point you're trying to make with the quote for your reader. Then comes the most important part. Step 2 is really where you get into the guts of things, right? And this is where you expand probably for 2, 3, 4, 5 sentences. Why is this quote important in supporting your point? So you dig into, this is important because blah, 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 and it highlights the main ideas of this, and you do the analysis of the quote here, right? And show how it supports your argument. And then lastly, step 3, if this is the last quote or the only quote in your paragraph, then you're going to end this by tying your ideas back to your topic sentence and say, this is why it then demonstrates and supports my topic sentence. Or if you're going to have a second quote, you might say, another example of this is in, blah, blah. Or if it's a contrasting paragraph, you'll say, in contrast, such and such a person argues, blah, blah, blah. Right, so in some way you're linking to another quote. So there are your 2 options for step 3. Either tie it back to the topic sentence or link it forward to the next quotation. And I do apologize about the chainsaw action outside my window. Hope it's not too disruptive. When it comes to thinking about those 3 steps, if it helps, you can use these kind of mental crutches, if you like, to kind of support. And these are just for when you're actually writing in the middle of kind of writing a draft. I would suggest that you remove them when you do your proofreading, so that because you don't need these in there, just to remind you of the 3 steps. So for step 1, the paraphrase, if you think to yourself, in this quote, the author's point is, and then blah, 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 then that reminds you that, okay, step 1 is just paraphrasing or summarizing what the author is arguing, right? Step 2, if you use the crutch, this is important because, and then you go into that, then again, that's going to remind you, okay, this is where I want to show why this quote is important. And then for step 3, your phrase is going to be either a linking one, another example of this is in the blah, 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 or this supports my topic sentence, or this supports my claim in that. And then again, so you use those ones as thinking crutches, and then you remove them when you complete your sentence, just like you would stop using your crutches once your broken leg has healed, right? They're there to support you when you need them, but then when you're finished, you can remove them. I hope that video has kind of summarized the main parts of CER paragraphs for you so that you can refresh yourselves on that. And if you've got any questions about these, obviously ask me in class or send me a message, and we can chat about how to make this clearer for you. I look forward to reading your responses.